Sitting in the cul-de-sac, contemplating murder. Swerving with my circus, looking for a purpose. Pseudo clean record, hope got another surface.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to episode 15 of Culper's Canteen Cup. It's been a busy news week since last Memorial Day weekend. We've got a lot of stuff to cover today. But before we get into that, I'm going to send it over to sexy voice Josh to plug a local business.
Hey, are all you canteeners tired of being stuck inside? You ready to get back outside and stretch your legs? I know I am. Head on over to Outdoor 76. They're open and ready to outfit with the latest outdoor clothing and equipment so you can focus on having fun and making up for lost time. Outdoor 76 is a small family-owned business specializing in the best outdoor clothing, footwear, hiking gear, and accessories with locations in Franklin, North Carolina, and Clayton, Georgia. They're perfect locations to get you outfitted and started on any type of venture in the mountains for North Georgia and Western North Carolina. Franklin, North Carolina is a designated Appalachian Trail community and perfectly situated for your next AT adventure, whether that's a day, section, or even a through hike. So head on over to Outdoor 76 at one of their two locations or check them out at www.outdoor76.com. You can also find them on Facebook and Instagram. Again, head on over, check them out, and gear up for your next outdoor adventure. All right, so today, like Luke said, we have it's been a busy news week. 2020 has been just a complete disaster, thus far. So we're going to cover two main topics in this episode. And the first one we're going to talk about is George Floyd and what's going on in, Minneapolis right now. I don't know, it's hard to say. Obviously, it's extremely inflammatory. It's very controversial. But what I'll say about it is this. Based on the video that we have, and everybody, you always want to wait until all the evidence comes out. We've seen this before. We've seen this movie play over, more than a few times, and we kind of know how they end. But this one seems pretty cut and dry, right? So, there's multiple videos from multiple angles, from the time they pull George Floyd out of his vehicle, to the end. And it's pretty, it's pretty egregious, what happens. I think, Roger said there's like a full 7 minutes, to where this officer is kneeling down on his neck after he's handcuffed, right? So, my personal opinion is the officer, he has been arrested as of about 45 minutes, maybe an hour ago. They should absolutely face charges. But I think people need to apply, some Hanlon's razor to this, and never equate to malice what you can equate to incompetence or stupidity. There's zero evidence that this was racially charged. There is zero evidence that this was racially motivated. And I think people need to step back and take a look at that. I think we're probably a little late for that. We've already, gone down the road. People automatically want to equate race with this, and they want to equate race with everything that comes along in this vein. And I just don't, unless there's evidence proving otherwise, I don't equate race to this. I certainly do not equate the false equivalencies that people are pushing out there, saying that this is the same, the looting and the rioting going on is the same as the Boston Tea Party. It is absolute nonsense. The grievance is against the police, not, the Target store that got looted and burned, not the CVS, not the small businesses, the mom and pop businesses that have been looted and burned, had nothing to do with this. And if you go back and look at the Boston Tea Party, the Sons of Liberty, one, they specifically only targeted the tea, right, because of the tea tax from the East India Company that the British was imposing on them, right? So Britain was in a lot of debt, and they were going to try and balance that, balance their budget on the backs of the colonists, and specifically tea. So I don't think there's any equivalency there, and I think any comparison of those two is absolutely just absurd. So I can go over to Roger and let Roger give his thoughts on it.
So do you think they actually took any of the tea home with them, or do they throw it all in the harbor?
So
just kind of curious.
So they threw it all in the harbor. There were some folks there that tried to line their pockets with some tea and line their pockets with some other private property, right? And the Sons of Liberty that were there, they stopped them. They stopped them from doing that. So again, like they even replaced, there was one lock broken, and this is, as far as history goes, there was one lock broken, and they actually replaced the lock the next day, right? They sent them over a new lock, and they kind of like, here you go, our bad. We had to break your lock. So
hey, why don't you give those riders a couple days, man? Just give them a couple days, and maybe they'll return that shit. You never know. Maybe you're jumping the gun a little bit, Josh.
Maybe I am jumping the gun. I kind of wanted to reach out to the one guy who, got a picture of him, and he's got, a couple of bottles of whiskey, stuffed into the pocket of his shorts, and it got a couple of his hands. I mean, it was shitty whiskey. I think one of them was like,
it wasn't even good whiskey.
I know. One of them was like the Jack Daniels, like green apple, like it's just some bullshit, man. I was hoping that I could reach out to that guy, maybe find him and see if he could snag me a bottle of Pappy. Or like a Victor's 20 year or something, while you're at it. If you're going to do it, man, at least get the good shit. But I just think it's absolutely nonsense. And you have these people out here that are virtue signaling. They never post on social media about this shit until it's a big case like this. And all of a sudden they're like, oh my God, I can't believe what's going on. Black people are disproportionately targeted, by the police, which statistics do not back that up. Every other time that, somebody gets killed in some senseless killing, they're silent, until it's socially acceptable to speak out. And now they're kind of hopping on that bandwagon. It's nonsense,
Well, and you notice the first card that's played is the racism card. And I, kind of back to what you were saying, like I don't know if this guy's a racist or not. I don't know if any of the 4 officers that were involved, I don't know their history, other than what I've read. Obviously Chauvin had, 18 complaints since 2001. So, I mean, you are talking about 19 years, 18 complaints. Again, that can be anything from small time to, at least 2 of them he was disciplined for. But, I don't know. I guess the point being with all 4 of them, I don't know if they've had any or shown any patterns of racism in the past, but that was it was interesting because I live out here in Phoenix, not Apache Junction, Luke, but by the way, they are having a state land auction for Apache Junction land. So, you can strap up. It's happening in like 2 weeks, man. But, I was with my kids, last night and they were rioting in Phoenix, which I kind of don't understand because, I mean, we're kind of out of one, it was hot. All right. It's like 105 degrees. And generally speaking, rioters don't like hot weather. And I don't even know what they're rioting against or what they're protesting against or whatever. But my kids are watching all this stuff unfold on the news. And of course, my boy just turned 18 and we were watching local news, which was kind of good because, as we've talked about in the past, between editorials and actual news, I was like, hey, kids, pay attention to what you're watching and how the local news portrays what's happening differently than when we watch Fox News or CNN or whatever. It tends to be, hey, this is what's going on. But even my boy, the first thing he jumped to was, that's kind of messed up. Now, here's the thing. From what I've seen with the video, and like Josh said, normally it's like, hey, kids, shut your pie holes, let everything come out over these next couple days, couple weeks, and then once all the facts are out, then make your determination. I think, and I'm not going to jump all the way to the end, but I think with what I've seen, because the video I saw this morning was when the cops actually pulled him out of the vehicle. And that was there for a couple minutes. You had 2 police officers, one on each side of the vehicle. And I forget who was riding with him. It was either his wife or, his mom or whatever, and then somebody in the back. But the cop, after a couple minutes, pulls him out. Doesn't look like there's too much of a struggle. I did hear reports that, he may have been under the influence. So they pull him out of the vehicle. It looks like he's handcuffed right there as they pull him out. And then they take him over to a wall that's like maybe 10 yards away, 5 yards away, and they sit him down there for a couple minutes. And then from there, they pick him back up, walk him over to the police car, and then, a different camera angle jumps in. So just from looking at that, I don't know how you get to the knee on the neck. I think what the 7 minutes, it's pretty ridiculous. But the bigger point to this, so there's 2 issues, right? I think what the cops did, from what I've seen, totally wrong. Absolutely. And if they find, the other videos come out and there's enough evidence there to charge them with murder or whatever they need to charge them with, they need to do that. What bothers me the most is that everybody immediately jumps to racism. And it's like, well, you don't know these cops were racist. And, I told my kids, it's like, my daughter, it's like, that could have been you. My boy, that could have been you. That could have been me. That could have been any one of us. Okay. He happened to be black. Can you say that because that happened to a black man, that's a racist event? And then obviously, you have the protests, which, by the way, full supporter of protests. I'm an advocate of it. I tell my kids all the time. I tell my wife, it's like, hey, man, that is one of your basic freedoms and rights is to protest. But then once you get to the riots, it's like Josh said, you've got folks come out here trying to defend that. It's like, how do you defend robbing a Target, right? Like, so in protest of all the racism, I'm going to carry out this, 65-inch flat screen TV. That's how I'm going to what purpose is that? So the bottom line is they just want free shit. I mean, just call it what it is, right? You have actual protesters that are there because of the injustice they've seen and what have you. And so that's one case by itself. But then the rest of those thugs, I think I was reading it was just for some of the big name stores, it was like an AutoZone, it was a Wendy's, it was a Target. And then I think I've heard a lot of small mom and pop shops. One guy had to go out there and spray paint minority-owned business so they wouldn't, they wouldn't rob his store, trash his store. So, I think my problem is when you get to, just the George Floyd piece by itself, which will all come out, like you said, one of the officers has been arrested, but the rioting and the protesting, it just doesn't support the cause. And now the news is about that. It's not about George Floyd. Whatever's going to come out. So they kind of detract from the message. And it's that jump to racism. So I know I've rambled a little bit. Let me kick it to Luke, get some of his thoughts and perspective on it.
I hate following Roger because he's so well planned out and he's so, articulate, and I'm just kind of all over the place. He cuts out half my stuff, folks. So you'll never know what I think. That is true.
So all the listeners out there, for both of you, you're only hearing 55% of the stuff that Luke says. Just saying.
Okay, I'm going to try to be articulate here. So, first of all, I saw the video pretty early on. My wife actually called me and she just was outraged. She couldn't believe what she had seen. And I told Josh earlier today, I'm not going to use the R word, the race word, but I think I kind of have to express why I'm outraged over certain things. I think what all three of us here at the Cup agree is out of line. It's manslaughter at best. It's murder at worst. Once a police officer takes a person into custody, it is their job to protect them, to ensure that person's rights, ensure that person has access to their rights and access to the justice system. So they screwed up and they killed a guy. Well, we'll see what happens, but he did die in their custody, and the knee on the neck for 7 minutes did not help. Now, what outraged me most was what started to outrage me was the day after. I'm going through Facebook, going through Twitter, and I'm seeing conflation of things that have nothing to do with this issue. The Boston Tea Party thing that came up a couple days ago. Somebody posting Colin Kaepernick picture kneeling next to the cop. It's like, man, you're really stretching. And another, calling out, white people, you should speak up more. You should be more outraged about this. And I'm like. This was not a white person, black, Hispanic, purple, red, green. This was an American who was denied his rights by the police, by the state. Okay, I know good cops, bad cops, I understand it. But it leads into another thing, man. I mean, this was a real opportunity for the American tribes, the two tribes that are out there. We all know what I'm talking about there. You have your two Second Amendment guys. You've got your rioters on the street, Black Lives Matter, police brutality. This was a real opportunity, and it still is for both sides to kind of come together on this and be like, you know what? It's not about race. It's about the police are out of control. Not all of them, but in the big urban centers, I mean, stuff is happening. We just came out of 2 to 3 months of being locked down. There's a lot of frustration. The Second Amendment people showed up with guns at state capitals. Cops are coming in, rolling up with MRAPs to, bars and pointing their weapons at people. There's a lot of pent up rage and frustration. I see this as two sides of the same coin. It's like, let's come together. Let's hold the police forces accountable. There is no higher standard. The expectations are not too high for these police departments. And, I'm telling you, It was a powder keg, and it was inevitable that it was going to go off. And this is why I think COVID-19 is over. The media has jumped on this, and nobody cares about the 100,000 Americans that just died anymore. Okay, it's over. We're on to a new news cycle. So I guess that's the good news, I guess you could say. But to the point of rioting and looting, I'm with Roger and Josh. I am all for protesting, man. And even though I may not agree with it, I definitely don't agree with the looting the Target and the AutoZone and stuff like that. That's just looting. That's just criminal behavior. But I may not agree with it, but I understand these people burning down the precinct. I understand them going after the cops. That is sending a message to the government. Now, again, I don't necessarily agree with it, but at some point the government needs to know, needs to realize, like they said in that Waco, like the FBI guy, HRT guy said in the Waco series, he's like, it's all an illusion. As long as the people believe that we have the power over them, they'll roll over. But on any given day, if the government really turns on the people, dude, they don't have power. And that's what's showing, I'm not advocating for anything. I'm just saying it's good for the government to be reminded every time. This is what can happen if you fuck up. So I've got more to say, but I'm going to kick it to Josh before I get too worked up.
No, man, go ahead and get worked up. It's good. No, you're absolutely right. If I absolutely get you want to go torch the police precinct, you want to flip over a couple of cruisers, and set them on fire on Main Street. Like, I don't necessarily agree with it, but I understand it, and I can absolutely get that. And you're right. From time to time, the government has to be reminded, who is in charge. Absolutely not advocating for violence, not advocating for anything. But when you go and you burn down a 189 unit low income housing building in your neighborhood, what point are you proving? Like, what are you doing? You're not doing anything. All you did was just take away from the people in your neighborhood, those people that are probably helping you loot, and now 189 available places that people could live, that people that need that don't have that anymore. There was a retired firefighter there who had a sports bar, opened up a sports bar, lifelong dream, retired from the fire department, and now he doesn't have a sports bar anymore. Why? Because people went in and looted it and trashed it. Hey, what did you prove? Did you show the government, anything? No, you didn't. You didn't do anything. And all you did, like Roger said, all you did was to detract from, the real tragedy here, which is a man is dead because of a police officer who was absolutely incompetent, right? Or did it out of malice. We don't know. Right. I don't know if any of those cops are racist. I don't know. But, one thing that we haven't seen, I don't know the demographics of Minneapolis, but, you saw it in L.A. and you've seen a couple of pictures of it out of Minneapolis so far, of folks in front of their businesses armed to the teeth. Right. You saw it in L.A. You saw, the rooftop Koreans in L.A., man. They were up there and they were loaded for bear and they were ready to go to protect their business. And that's absolutely, to me, that's absolutely insane. Like, if my neighbor wrongs you, if my neighbor does something egregious, don't come burn down my house because of it. Come tell me what my neighbor did. Come show me what my neighbor did. And if I think it's egregious, I'll come with you to protest. I'll come with you. People say that there's, institutional racism in the United States. And don't get me wrong. I think I absolutely believe racism exists. Right. But when people talk about, well, it's institutional racism and all police officers, that's nonsense and that's garbage. And you automatically lose me. Any support I'm going to give you, you have automatically lost. When you say nonsense like that, you show me the institution and you show me the specific law, the specific act that they're doing that is racist, I will go with you and fight that. Right. But what you don't get to do is go burn down my neighbor's house or burn down my house because you're pissed off and you're upset. That's not how this works. Right. We can't have that. And when you do that, you lose support for your cause. And your message gets lost in that nonsense. Not that any of these people looting and rioting are ever going to be arrested and face justice. Nobody in Baltimore ever got arrested, or face justice for looting and burning down stores there. Over the what was that, the Freddie Gray incident? Like when Baltimore was on fire. Nobody ever Nobody ever got arrested or stood justice for that. So yeah, it's a mess. And at the end of the day, the tragedy in all of this is that George Floyd is dead, and he probably didn't need to be. He did not need to be. Had somebody like Amy Klobuchar maybe done her job when she was a prosecutor. Roger, you mentioned this guy had 19 complaints against him in a 19-year career, right? That's one complaint a year. You got somebody in 19 years, and they have one or two. Okay, yeah, but bro, you got 19. You got one. You average one a year. I mean, that's a hell of a batting average, right? That's that's to most to most common sense people that you have long established a pattern. And so, somebody probably should have looked and be like, hey man, there's smoke here. There's probably some fire somewhere. We should probably go back and, and do something about this. I don't know how that's going to, I don't know how that's going to go over for Klobuchar. I did see Keith Ellison come out and defend Klobuchar, actually defend her record on that. I don't know, what Keith Ellison's plans are. I don't know if he's going to beat any of these looters or protesters like he beat his girlfriend, or anything. So allegedly beat his girlfriend. Hey man, I'm just waiting to see the police chief of Minneapolis come out and say something. I'm waiting for people to come out and say he should resign or be fired, for allowing this guy to stay on the force. I don't think we'll see that anytime soon. And I'm kind of curious to see what the governor is going to, see what that guy's going to come out and say. He's a couple things. Somebody asked him if he had a plan during the press conference, and he was like, as it pertains to what? It's like, oh, I don't know. Maybe because Minneapolis is fucking burning to the ground, bro. What's your plan? You got the National Guard right now. They showed some pictures of them. There's 500 in the city. They are patrolling with no magazines in their weapon. It's clear as day. They showed them, and it's like, okay, I'm gonna send Joe the bartender or whoever out here, as a National Guardsman, but I'm not gonna give them ammo. I don't know exactly what they're supposed to do. So. Yeah, it's a shit show, and it's starting to spill over into other, right? It's spilling over, like Roger said, spilling over to other cities. The state house in Ohio, the windows are being smashed out of it right now, and people are trying to break inside the state house of Ohio over this. Well, why? Like, did the Ohio government have something to do with George Floyd being being killed?
No, dude, Josh, I'm okay. I think it goes back to what I said, dude. People have been pimped up for too long. People are fed up with law enforcement to a point. So, I mean, yeah, I agree with you, about burning your neighbor's house down, of course. But it's like, the protests in Phoenix, I would like to believe that it's because they were pissed off about the police force in Minneapolis. Maybe they've seen other things and we're looking at, the police but I believe that this, I would want to believe that people are putting the government on notice. Like, hey, look, you need to square your stuff away. Now, unfortunately, I want to believe that. I don't necessarily think it's true. But I do think we'll get to that point, because this is not the last time this is going to happen. Something similar is going to happen. Something similar probably happened last week. It just didn't get any press. Something similar probably happened back in mid-April, but it didn't get any press because that wasn't the news cycle back then, And I want to issue a correction right now before I kick it to Roger. Sorry to cut you off there, Roger. But I want to issue a correction. I no longer think Amy Klobuchar will be Vice President Biden's selection to be vice president.
Way to go out on a limb there, Luke. Appreciate that. Yeah, and they are already talking about, we were passing around articles earlier today. We were talking about Stacey Abrams, but another topic by itself. I tell you, the problem that I have with the rioting and even the protests, one, in all fairness, so a lot of the leaders of Black Lives Matter have come out and said, hey, stop the protesting. I've actually heard of some folks on the ground through the news that are, trying to stop all the rioting, not the protesting, right, but the rioting and the looting. I think, even George Floyd's family has come out and said, hey, let's stop the looting, let's stop the violence, let's do peaceful protesting or what have you. The problem with all of this, when you talk about a systematic problem that we have or a systemic problem, you're already at step 3 or 4. You talk about, it's putting the government on notice. Hey, let me break this down to you. You know how you put the government on notice? You vote. Okay, that's how you put the government on notice. Because, even when you look at your 2008, your 2012, your 2016, even your presidential elections, best case, you're between 60 and 70% voter turnout, which means that's on a national level. When you look at your local level, you're lucky to hit even 50%. I've got places out here that I've seen that it's a 40% voter turnout. So I would tell you this, you really want to talk about, reminding them. You remind them by voting. Okay, you put the people in office, that are about equality, liberty, justice, upholding the Constitution, what have you. People don't get involved at the grassroots to their, in their local communities, their local elections, their local officials, and all the way up to the state. And that's how you end up with corrupt folks up there. As far as the governor, he came out this morning with his little press conference, and it's a little tangent here, but let me put this. This is what he says, and I'm paraphrasing you here, okay? So it's not a quote. We are not allowing protests because it violates our prohibition of gatherings over 10 people. Think about that for a minute. And, I posted on my Facebook page earlier, it's the, one of those is a constitutional right. So, you go figure that out. But, I think when I look at the fallout from all of this stuff, protests are good, love them. I guess my next big question to either one of you is, obviously the George Floyd piece is going to work itself out one way or another. Probably, one's going to obviously be charged. I don't know about the other three. One is definitely going to be charged. But as far as the other side of the house with the protests, where does that go? And is it continued protesting? And do these folks actually go back to the community and say, hey, maybe we need to make a change locally? Because here's the thing, like we talked about sheriffs, right? I think it was last episode. Sheriffs are elected. When you look at your police chief, or police chiefs, they're what? Are they? They're appointed.
It depends. Depends on where it is.
So it can be elected, you can be appointed, whatever. So maybe you're looking at your mayoral elections or what have you. It's like folks have to get involved, right? That's where you started, is at the voting level. And if you don't start off at step one, it's hard to really come in and that's where my problem is, right? People come in at step 4 and it's like, man, you didn't go through. It's through least to most intrusive, right? Like when we talk about search and seizure and this, it's like you start off with the small stuff, the easiest things to change at first, and then you ramp it up when you need to when those fail.
Well, that's why Sharpton is there now, right? The system's broken. Of
course.
That's why
There we go. We're good now.
Because look, yeah, you're right. You're right, Roger. Man, I'll back up and say, yeah, the way you put the government on notice is to vote. But when you've got special interest groups flipping this on its head at the very beginning and calling it a race issue, and then Sharpton shows up, voting's not going to change anything. It's just going to be a bigger Democrat majority. That's all it's going to do. So it's like, yeah, so that's why I go down that road of putting the government on notice by, that's what is happening by trashing precincts and police cars, is that the system's broken. If more people go and show up to vote there, nothing's going to change. So, yeah, dude, but I agree with you. But that's why Sharpton's there, is to spin this into something that's not.
So, and I get it. Voting doesn't solve anything today. Voting was something that you would have had to do 4 or 5, 10 years ago, right, to make these type of changes. Voting is not immediate, so absolutely agree with you. There are certain things that you have to do that get that immediate impact. At the end of the day, maybe this guy was just a shitty cop. At the end of the day, maybe he was just a shitty person. And you could have been white, black, yellow, Hispanic, it doesn't matter. Maybe he was just a shitty person, and whoever got pulled over that day, for the counterfeit 20 or whatever in the hell it was, that was going to happen. For those that are on the racism thing, I think Josh touched a little bit on this earlier. So I pulled a couple of statistics, and it came from the Washington Post. So, take it for what it is. But just to kind of put things in perspective, here's a macro level of it. So the number of people shot to death by police officers from 2017 to 2020. We'll start off with the black population. 2017, 223, 2018, 209, 2019, 235, 2020, 31. So that gives you a grand total of 698. Take a guess how many white people were shot to death by a police officer, Josh?
Probably double that, easy.
1,268.
Yeah.
Jeez.
Yeah.
Okay. And Hispanics, 498. And unknown is actually 629. So you could take the unknown, the 629, and you could probably equally divide them, right? Because they're a mix or whatever. So now I get it. People are going to say, well, the population, because the white population is 72% of America and black is roughly 13%. But that is a very macro view of this. Okay, so I don't think that necessarily applies to it when you talk about racism. It's a very macro view of it. So when you look at number for number, 698 as of a couple days ago when I pulled this versus 1,268. So again, not to say that these cops weren't racist or one of them were, or what. I think the other one was even a minority. I mean, what's his name? 20 whatever his name is. I mean, it sounds like a minority to me.
You can't pronounce that. You can't pronounce that?
I was actually looking for his name.
He looked so I believe
Tuo, something like that.
Yeah, I believe I read somewhere where he was a Pacific Islander.
You're saying it all wrong, Roger. Your pronunciation's all off.
So here's the thing, right? So
I'm a poor minority. Sorry.
So you look at that, you look at those numbers right there, right? And so that says a lot. So when you come out, people come out and say, well, black people are targeted more, or shot more by police officers than white people, automatically, like, that doesn't hold any water, and the statistics don't support that, right? And if people are like, oh, like you said, 72% of the population, 73%, vice 13%, but you go back and look, okay, what race, disproportionately commits more crimes, right? And so
right.
Regardless of that, there were three, and this is another important thing, and this is an unpopular opinion on a lot of folks, is there were three other police officers standing there. So I love police officers, right? I'm a huge police supporter. However, as a police officer, you are held to a much higher standard than Joe Q Public, right? If you were a police officer and you were standing there and you were watching a fellow police officer abuse somebody, if you were watching them do something that you know to be wrong and you do not step in and correct it and fix it, guess what? Fuck you too. You can burn with them, right? There were three other police officers that were standing there watching that, who knew that, like you said, once someone is in police custody, they are now the responsibility. Their welfare is now your responsibility. It's like prisoners of war on the battlefield. You have to take them in and you safeguard them. You protect them like you would anybody else, right? And so for the police officers out there, hey man, you guys have got to start policing your own. You cannot allow these bad apples to ruin it for you and ruin it for everybody else, because we're going to get to that point, and a lot of people are already at that point, to where they look at police officers and like I tell my kids, growing up, it's like, hey, if you're in trouble, what do? Go find a police officer. Have that police officer help you. A lot of people aren't telling their kids that anymore. Why? Because it's just a few bad, it's a few bad apples. Not all police officers are bad. Not all minorities are bad. Not all white people are bad. Like, it's just, but if you are not helping yourselves, then you're part of the problem. And it's, when it comes to police officers, man, you have to find those bad apples and get them out, get rid of them, correct them. All one of those cops had to do, man, was walk over, grab that dude by the shoulder, and be like, "Get out, hey man, like, I don't think that dude can breathe. You need to get off of him." And if that guy said, get bent, whatever, that's fine. But you're kneeled down like that, man. Your center of gravity's all off. And if I have to fucking football tackle you, bro, I'm getting you off that guy. Because there's people around, there's people watching. It's the right thing to, like, just, for fuck's sake, man. Like, you just.
Well, because 99% of the police officers are good, right?
Yeah.
Men and women.
Yeah.
And the fact is, this goes back to my comment about being a shithead. That person, right, Chauvin or whatever the hell his name is, he was going to be a shithead no matter what profession he was in. He could have been a soldier. He could have been a teacher. He could have been a firefighter. He could have been anything. And guess what? He was going to be a shitbag. He just happened to be in a position of authority where, he had the ability to unleash some pain on some people. And that's, and ultimately kill a guy. So, I take this, kind of wrap it back up for me. I asked Luke, I think, and maybe even you, Josh, earlier today, and this kind of goes back to my voting thing, and I get it. Voting is a very macro level, or that is a 30,000-foot level. And again, it doesn't solve anything here and now. But, I asked earlier because I remember a conversation I had with a buddy years ago back in Baltimore when a lot of stuff was going down. But it's like, so where do police derive their authority from? When we talk about MRAPs and we talk about all the equipment they buy and the tactics they use, because what you're doing as an American or anybody here in this country, you're giving up certain rights, correct? I mean, you give up certain rights, you give up certain freedoms because, theoretically the police are going to, they need that to happen in order to control the public. Or keep the peace, I guess is a better way to put it, not necessarily control the public. But, I ask, where do police derive their authority from? And ultimately, they derive their authority from the 10th Amendment, right? That passes down powers to the state. And then from there, you have state constitutions all the way down to your county and your city, revised statutes and what have you. So that's my point at the macro level. Is like, hey, man, get involved locally. I mean, I get it. It doesn't solve the George Floyd piece, right? But if you don't like the actions that are taken, you don't like the rights that you're giving up, because I question that. It's like, where was my say in all of this, right? When I look at whatever I have to do out here in Phoenix, that's required by law. It's like, well, where is my say in all this? Well, my say in all this was at the ballot box. Okay. And whether you choose to do that, so I would say that, folks that continue, what I would like to see is folks that are out there protesting, especially, in Minnesota and these areas that are impacted. It's like, hey, if you really want change, start changing the leadership, start getting some, laws in place or some activities or actions in place that support that cause, right? For liberty, freedom, all that other good stuff. So that's kind of, my 30,000 foot level. I'll kind of leave it at that. That's about all I got to say about it. I'll kick it back to Luke, and he can, give his final thoughts on it.
Yeah. I think you pretty much summed it up there, Roger. And I'll even go so far as to say this, not 1% or less of cops out there are bad. It's a lesson I learned early in life. People don't remember all the good you did. They remember that one time you screwed up. I'll say that same thing of the protesters, the ones, it only takes a little spark, one guy throwing a brick through a window for everybody to be like, okay, screw it. I think a lot of people that are out there protesting, the majority of them want to see change. They want to see, they want justice. So you got to give it to them. Not all of them are bad. The ones coming out of Target with, their arms full of nonsense, those are the bad ones. So I'll give it to them. Josh, do you have any closing thoughts on that before we go on the next topic?
Just one, where's the ACLU? Are they still missing in action? Because they've been silent for months and months and months now.
Well, no, because they're busy. They're busy addressing the next topic that Luke's going to talk about. So they've been gone since March, right? And they're gone through all of this. But the next topic, and I'm going to cut you off real quick before you close it out, Josh, because you did mention this earlier. Just a quick stat. So to date, through May 25th in Chicago, 191 people have been killed so far. Talking about the suburban area, which, by the way, is one fewer than all of 2019. So you got a lot of those, Black Lives Matter, White Lives Matter, all lives matter, and this and that. If they matter, go look at your backyard, because you've got 191 deaths, right, already to date in Chicago.
No, because those people, Black lives only matter when they're shot by a white person. When it's black on black, they don't care, right? Because it's not, it's just, it's not as
inflammatory.
Yeah, it doesn't get.
Again, these are the activists. These are the activists that are saying this, not the normal person.
Right. Yeah.
Because I guarantee in Chicago, in inner city Chicago, there are a lot of upset people.
Yeah. No, absolutely. But I don't see Al headed to O'Hare.
Exactly. Exactly.
He is the worst grifter of them all. And the last thought I have on it is, man, a lot of these pro-gun control people who are like, you don't need that gun, that's what we have the police for, they've been awfully quiet. On this one. So I'm curious where they're at, and don't think we've forgotten about you, Boogaloos. Hey, man,
actually, Josh, they're in line. They're in line waiting their 3-day waiting period to buy their weapon right now.
Right. The Boogaloos, man. You got cops out here acting pretty fascist, killing people in the street in broad daylight. Where were you at? Oh, that's right. You were sitting in your mom's basement, not doing anything. So that's my final thought on that.
Woo! That was a lot of stuff, and we could probably continue going on, but we really, and you know what? This will probably come out. I don't know. Depends on when our producer gets it out there, but I'm sure more will happen over the weekend. So I'm sure there'll be more to talk about. But we felt we needed to speak about a couple things that have been going on over the past week. A tweet that set off a firestorm by the president. But we'll try to get this in 20 minutes. I'll give you some quick background. Back in 1996, those of you who are too young to remember, around 1996 was the first time I kind of got on the internet. And I rolled into an AOL chat room. And when people are chatting about certain things, and man, it was the freaking Wild West, man. People were saying some off the wall stuff. People were sending videos, or not videos, but they were, because the bandwidth was too low, they were sending pictures of just the most horrible, nasty stuff, and there was some websites dedicated to showing pictures of crime scenes and deaths. I mean, it was the Wild West in '96. A lot back then, there was no Facebook. There was, there was nothing. There was no Twitter, no YouTube. It was just a bunch of online platforms that weren't making a lot of money back then compared to what they're making now. The government did see that, hey, you know what? We need to put forth something that's going to protect these smaller providers that aren't making billions of dollars, protect themselves against lawsuits. Because if somebody puts a piece of child pornography through an AOL server and, there's an exploited child and the parent sees that, they were like, well, wait, we can sue that company for it passing through the servers. And the companies couldn't afford that at the time. So the government, federal government, came up with a thing called the Communications Decency Act, where basically these internet service providers were protected from being sued. They were called platforms, not publishers. So they were different than a newspaper. They were more like, we are hosting this content. And there's only 26 words that apply to this particular section we're going to talk about, Section 230. 26 words. I'll read them real quick. No provider or user of an interactive computer service shall be treated as the publisher or speaker of any information provided by another information content provider. In other words, they're not responsible for what people post on their platform within reason. They still are expected to police against crime scene photos, child pornography, anything that's advocating violence. It's within reason. So what we want to talk about is the difference between, Trump came out with the executive order, basically kind of curbing some of those things that Facebook, Twitter, YouTube enjoy because of Section 230. So Trump is now saying, basically, because of this, in this executive order, that these providers are going to kind of be considered publishers instead of platforms, unless they change their ways. So y'all are tired of hearing me talk about it. That's a quick boiled down background. I'm going to kick it to Roger first, and he can give some of his concerns with this, and then we'll kind of go around the horn.
Yeah, look, we've had this conversation for months. And so for the listeners out there, I purposely did zero, background research on this, because Luke's got some involvement with publishing and books and that type of stuff. And so he's really into the weeds in a lot of it. So I really wanted to bring like a layman's term to this, or a layman's, viewpoint or perspective, because, at the end of the day, it's the so what, right? How does this impact me? What do I need to know about this? And one, I didn't even know there were different publishing laws until Luke, it's like, well, should they be publishers? Should they be not? And I didn't know any of that until he brought it up. So, I'm learning as we go as well. And I guess I have some questions kind of back and forth, because the big problem that I have with all of this, and what I've argued, with Luke and not smartly, not knowing, publishing laws. But, when you look at your Facebooks, your Twitters, your Instagram, any of your social media platforms or any platform, I look at free speech. Okay. And what your right to free speech is. And I tell you, the one thing I did do some background on was the freedom of speech, right? Obviously a constitutional right. And I tell you this, ladies and gentlemen, those in between, go out there and gurgle like free speech. Because when you look at Supreme Court rulings, like I don't even know what free speech is anymore. Like when I look at the Supreme Court rulings and look at the historics of it, I mean, it's all over the place, right? I get the whole part, you don't want to incite actions that would harm to others, right? So you can't go out and yell fire at a theater. I understand that point of view. But, like to make or distribute obscene materials, Roth versus U.S., you can't do that. What's the definition of obscene? And I don't want to go down that rabbit hole, but anyway, it just kind of comes back that freedom of speech is, it's very hard to define, right? The second piece of this, and being involved with, small businesses, this may even be, equally as important. I have a hard time when the government comes in to regulate or dictate what a private, and I get it, publicly traded, but who controls the majority of the shares, who has the voting power, to dictate what a private company can and can't do and how they have to operate. Within the legal limits of the law, and maybe that's where my line is with freedom, of speech and what Facebook and Twitter and this and that. Within the legal limits of what's lawful, it should be fine. And then once you go beyond that, then there's obviously a court system. Okay, you can be sued, right? Criminally, you can be sued civilly or what have you. There's a court system, a justice system in place to handle those things. But I have a real hard time with the government telling me how as I run a business on what I can and can't do, because regulations are there to keep the playing field level. That's what regulations are there for. When you look at the and Luke is throwing up his hands like he's praying right now, but that's the whole point of regulations. Okay, it's not to give one person a leg up, one person a leg down, whatever. It's to say, okay, the playing field is going to be even, and then that way the big businesses, small businesses, minority-owned businesses, whatever, have the same opportunity to succeed or fail. So I think, coming back to Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, my one fear is this. So, Luke, does this have the exact opposite impact that President Trump is looking for? Because if you start saying we can now hold you liable, right? Because this all came from a tweet, and Twitter came out. Now, again, Twitter didn't help themselves. Jack Dorsey and them, they went out and fact checked it, and they used, what was it, CNN or MSNBC as the source. So they didn't help themselves at all, right? So they fact checked it, they headlined it or caveated it or whatever. So now Trump's pissed off. He's like, you're censoring, yada yada yada. So. But I think in my mind, if I hold the fact that Twitter and Facebook can be held liable, won't that lead to further censorship? Because if I say, hey, I'm going to hold you liable for everything that you publish, now I'm going to have a team dedicated. I'm going to say, hey, guys, anything that's not exactly middle of the road, if it's left or right, you're kicking that stuff out. We need stuff that is going to pertain to the masses. Or am I seeing that wrong?
Okay, there's a lot to unpack there. A lot. There is. You're asking a lot of so some pretty complex questions. Okay. So let me try to break it down a little bit. Okay. The way Facebook and Twitter and YouTube are operating right now is exactly like a newspaper or a network TV, Fox, CBS, whatever. They function on advertising and content. Okay. Now, the New York Times has a certain audience, and that audience pays to read their content, and they work in the advertising there. That's how they get paid. That's how the New York Times makes money, is off advertising. It's not off of newspaper subscriptions. Okay? That is exactly how Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube, that's exactly how they operate right now, yet they're enjoying certain privileges because of Section 230. What this executive order hopefully is going to change things up, okay? And either Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube are going to start changing up their policies or not, because what Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube are doing is narrowing their audience the same way a newspaper does. So although they're not responsible for the certain content, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. They can trample on the rights because they're a public platform of someone who is going to be bad for business for them. So if somebody posts something on there that's bad for business that turns off an advertiser, they can come up with some way to, limit that person's speech. Now look at it this way, Roger. Okay. And maybe I'm reaching a little bit. I'm not reaching on this one. There's a public square where everybody can get together and talk. It's public space. It's a platform for people to exercise their free speech. There have to be certain rules. You can't advocate for violence against one particular person. You can't hold up a picture of child pornography or something horrible. Those are rules that are, along the lines of decency. But when the owner of that public platform starts making certain rules, well, these people can't talk, or we're going to limit their voices, we're going to limit their bandwidth. That's kind of the problem with Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. That's one of the things, without getting into each and every incident of it. There are certain voices that are being muted or shadow banned or whatever. Now, let me ask you this, Josh. Okay. I thought of this in the shower yesterday. It was great. So imagine that you have Ma Bell, AT&T or something, or AT&T, Verizon, and T-Mobile in the days of landlines. Okay. But they had technology, where they could detect voices and stuff like that, and determine what people were talking about based on keywords. And let's say one company decides, you know what, if two people are on the phone talking to each other and they start talking about Bernie Sanders is a great choice for president, or someone should vote for Bernie Sanders, we're just going to cut that off. We're going to cut off that conversation right there. Now, AT&T is a private company. They can do what they want. But people communicate via AT&T over the phone. People are talking about it's a way for people to communicate about participating in the process. But if they decide, nope, we are going to, hamstring that process and say you can't talk about this particular candidate, you can't talk about this particular issue, it's a regulation. That's what I was throwing my hands up. This EO, I think, this executive order is the first step in regulating so that there's somewhat of an even playing field for everyone. It's a regulation. I really think it's doing the opposite. I think it's increasing freedom of speech, not decreasing it. What do you think, Josh?
So I agree. So, initially, and we talked about this. So initially when I saw it come out that, Trump was going to, sign an executive order, limiting, and of course, the headline, I had a momentary lapse of good judgment and let the headline, speak to me rather than really reading into it. And on the surface, so I adamantly defend, all of our constitutional rights, from the get go. I would rather have, chaos than a safety, provided by the, government, at the loss of our rights. Right. So, just kind of like that knee jerk, no, do not encroach in this in any way, shape or form. But after we got talking about it and you brought up 230, it was okay, let's wait for the EO to come out. And no, I absolutely agree. Right. So I have no problem with private businesses running their business how they see fit. However, if you were going to act in such a way, if you were, you talk about, you're going to be a platform or a publisher or vice versa, then you should be regulated as such. If you were going to be a publisher and you are only going to allow certain content, then you should absolutely be held liable for the content that is published on your site, in your periodical, whatever medium you're using. You should absolutely be held liable. So if Twitter wants to, or Facebook, or, WeWe, or whatever the hell the platform is, if they want to, censor certain views, whether they be left or right, then they should absolutely be you have now crossed that line. You're now a publisher. You've lost those legal protections of being a platform, and now you're liable for everything that's put on there. And it's going to, one of two things are going to happen, right? Either people, that company is going to say, all right, fuck it, we're going to be a publisher, and they're going to, skew everything one way. And that's fine, because the free market will take care of itself. Someone will create something that is a true platform and it's true freedom of speech, right? Because the free market always wins. It may take a little while, but the free market will always find a way. Or the leaders of these companies, the CEOs, are going to start cracking down, and they're going to start identifying those employees who are using their positions, whether they're sitting there in the IT department, staring at ones and zeros or whatever. They're going to start identifying these people within their organizations and firing them and weeding them out, right? Because that's what's happening. A lot of these companies, started out with good intent and started out like, hey, no, we don't regulate this. We don't do that. We are a platform, but they have hired, right? And where are these companies located? Look at the areas and the demographics of where these companies are located, and the majority of people that they hired, those people have allowed their personal political beliefs and leans to impact their jobs and how they do their day-to-day jobs, right? Yeah. So companies are either going to identify those people and move them out and fire them, or they're going to allow it. And guess what? You know what? I think the executive order is a good thing. I think it's going to allow more free speech, because you saw it. Zuckerberg came out right after that, and dude, Zuckerberg came out and told Jack Dorsey, man, it's like, hey, that dude, we don't agree with that dude. That dude's on his own. Like Facebook, your platform, because Zuckerberg, for all his flaws, man, he's not dumb. The guy is not stupid. He knows that because there's no way you can regulate the content on platforms that big. You
not at scale. And that, I do admire Jack Dorsey a little bit because he comes out and he takes responsibility as the CEO. He's like, hey, don't get down on my employees. Anything my company does is me. So, hey, okay, he owns it. And man, did he screw up the other day when they fact checked Trump. Because Trump, he put out a tweet about, hey, if we allow mail-in voting, there will be fraud on a massive level during the election. That is an opinion. That is absolutely an opinion, because you can't form a factual statement about the future. And then Twitter came out and fact-checked an opinion and flagged it, saying this could be misleading or false information. And if you clicked on the link, the fact check sent you to opinions by CNN editorialists. So they fact checked with opinions. And that was a big mistake. And I think Trump and the Trump administration, I should say, was waiting for something like this. I think they've been getting a lot of heat by some of their bigger donors to start cracking down on this. And Roger, you could be right. I'm not going to pretend like I know what the blowback on this one's going to be. But to start, I think this is at least a good conversation point, a starting point to be like, okay, what are these companies actually doing? They're, billion-dollar companies now, and they can afford it, right? If they're going to act like publishers, they can afford to, Twitter can afford to hire a few more employees. I think they've only got 3,000 employees or something for a platform that big. It's crazy. So I'll leave it at that and kick it back to you, Roger.
So I think here indirectly we're on agreement. I actually don't disagree with very much of especially what you said and what Josh said. I think what I would like to see. So one, you can't compare the telecom company because one, it's regulated different. It's a critical infrastructure. It's a utility company, and they write the regulations for them because you have no choice. You have no alternative. So that's why they write those for that. Whereas we've argued this for months, that you do have an alternative with your social media. And you're already starting to see it, right? Because what was before Facebook? And Josh hit it on the head. The market's going to determine this stuff. It's going to work itself out. Before Facebook was what? MySpace, right? Then Facebook came out. And then what happened with, what happened with Facebook and the privacy and the Cambridge Analytics and this and that. So then you started having Snapchat. And in between there, before that, you had Twitter come out. IG, Instagram came out, which was, inevitably bought by Facebook. And now you have Minds and Mastodon and a bunch of these other platforms that are coming out. I think what I would like to see, and this is where I do agree with you, I think it is a step in the right direction. I would like to see the free speech, but you're able to hold those companies and those platforms liable. So in other words, and this goes, with your, shitty analogy about, a person owning the public square, well, then it's not a public square, whatever. My whole point is, if the speech or the content that you host or, that that people place on your social media platform, if it breaks the law, all right, then you're liable for it. You talk about holding up, child porn. You're breaking a law. You incite violence. You're breaking a law. So anyway, my whole point is, you have that free speech, but at the same time, Twitter, Facebook, slander, right? If you break the law, hey, if it's suable, that's how you fix that stuff. So I think that you open those doors and you say, okay, hey, you have total speech, but in agreement with you guys, hold them accountable. If Facebook publishes something or a user on Facebook publishes something that breaks one of the laws, they should be held liable. You should be able to sue them, right? But then again, it just goes a little bit farther. It's like, so where does that stop? So, I know it's a big topic. It's, I think at the end of the day, we're all in agreement. But I guess, Luke, I would pose this to you. I mean, is that fair? Is that I think I like the executive order. I say, you do hold them liable. But, they'll be held liable by legal standards. So if somebody publishes something that's against the law, then obviously they can be sued, whether it's criminally or civil. But other than that, I mean, you should have total free speech, right? I mean, I know it's big, but is that kind of it in a nutshell? And that's kind of how I see it.
I don't know. You're wrong about so many things. We only have like 2 minutes left, so we might have to unpack some of that stuff later. I think that the things we disagree on, and all you folks out there listening, you have to realize that the three of us go at each other's throats over the smallest little details. And Roger said a couple of small little details. I'm like, you son of a bitch. You're wrong, but it's not important. I am in agreement with the overall point that you're making. So freedom of speech, sure, but freedom of speech the same way as someone contributing to the New York Times editorial section. They have certain rights, but the editorial section doesn't have to publish their shit either.
Hold on. Exactly. But let me ask you this. And I heard a pundit say this the other day. Do you have the right to lie?
Yes. Depends about what.
I would agree with that, right? And obviously, very broad brushstrokes. But you have pundits on the major networks and political, folks out there that are like, came out word for word, almost a direct quote, you do not have the right to lie. And that's incorrect.
It depends on what it is.
Obviously, there are limits to it, right? But to the extremes. But I think the 80% in the middle of the road, 40-40. Yeah, you generally you have the right to lie, and that's my problem with a lot of this stuff. And I think like you're saying before I cut you off, it's like, yeah, they'll have the right not to publish it. And it goes on to a million different things, right? Because you go on to conservative radio, and what was that? The I forget what the name of it was, where they were, because conservatives control the airways, and they're saying, oh, you got to give equal time to the libs, and so I mean, this thing is like you said, before I cut you off, it's a lot to unpack, and it goes beyond just Facebook and Twitter.
Yeah, it is an interesting thing. It might be a little bit too technical, but I do think it will change the face of some things. I think you'll have to agree to new user terms pretty soon if you're going to continue to use those platforms. But Josh, you want to close us out?
Yeah, I'll close it out. You asked the question, do I have a right to lie? Yeah, you know what? I really, honestly, I have the right to say anything.
Absolutely.
I disagree with a lot of the, those stolen valor laws out there. Granted, I certainly don't advocate it. I think people who do it are deplorable. I think they're, I think there's deeper issues with them. They run around and be like, oh yeah, I won a silver star, I won the, the medal of honor, whatever, right? But do they have a right to do that? Should they be prosecuted for that? As long as they're not, using that for, financial gain, sure, I don't care. Like, you can go out and say whatever you want to. You can tell everybody you're a retired, Special Forces Sergeant Major, which, it seems to be like there's, every other person I meet, especially around here. Do you have the right to say that? Sure, you can say whatever you want to. I really don't care. However, once you're going to make that financial business decision that, Jack Dorsey has made, say, yes, I am going to regulate, some of the content, on my business. And that's fine. Absolutely. That is absolutely your right as a business owner. However, there are now laws and there are things that you're going to have to abide by. You have made that business decision. Just like if, I make a business decision that I'm going to close on Sundays, I'm not going to be open on Sundays. That's my business. I run it how I want to. And then the free market will decide on its own whether you have a good business model or whether you don't. That's the way it should work. So other than that, I think this closes us out for another episode of Culper's Canteen Cup. Once again, we really appreciate Carlton Zeus for the intro music. And you get a chance, you're getting ready to get back outside. Summer's here. It's here. It's getting warmer. It's getting super incredibly hot here on the East Coast. Head over to Outdoor 76 for all of your outdoor gear needs. And we will catch you guys on the next episode. Stay frosty.